Welcome to today's Deep Dive Learner. I want you to imagine waking up tomorrow, stepping outside, and, well, realizing the sun just isn't going to shine again for a decade.
Yeah, it's a pretty heavy thought.
It really is. Today, we are exploring the ultimate forced reset. Because, usually when we think about survival, we picture this clear, linear timeline.
Right, like a wilderness survival show.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
get lost in the woods, you build a fire, maybe you wait for a rescue chopper. There's this comforting assumption that no matter how bad things get for you in that specific moment, the rest of the world is still out there.
Just functioning normally.
Yeah, perfectly normal, just waiting to pull you back in.
It's the safety net of civilization. Even if you are, completely isolated in the wilderness, the grid is humming somewhere, someone is monitoring a satellite, a hospital is open.
But today, we are pulling the pin on that entire safety net. We're looking at a scenario where that net doesn't just tear, it vaporizes instantly. We're taking you into the ultimate doomsday scenario.
The big one.
Right. What would actually happen if every single nuclear weapon on Earth detonated simultaneously?
It is the absolute definition of an existential bottleneck. The physical and atmospheric reality of a global nuclear exchange is just far stranger and significantly more complex than anything you see in Hollywood blockbusters.
And we aren't just going to look at the explosions and call it a day. We are framing this entire deep dive around one specific, highly intense question for you. Based strictly on the catastrophic effects outlined in our sources, what would it actually take for a small, remote group of people to survive in this post-apocalyptic environment?
Assuming they even survived the initial blasts, yeah.
Right. If you are somehow far enough away from the blast zones, what are you actually waking up to on day two? Okay, let's unpack this, because before we even get to the survival part, my brain really struggles to picture the sheer scale of every weapon going off. How much firepower are we actually talking about here?
So the global arsenal, as of early 2026, sits at roughly 12,000 to 12,300 nuclear warheads. Out of those, about 9,600 to 9,700 are in active military stockpiles. And, this inventory is overwhelmingly dominated by Russia and the U.S.
I hear people say modern arsenals are smaller than they were at the peak of the Cold War. But 12,000 warheads? That still sounds like an incomprehensible amount of destructive capability.
Oh, absolutely. The combined explosive yield reaches into the thousands of megatons. And these weapons aren't just sitting in one giant warehouse somewhere.
Right, they're spread out.
Exactly. They're actively deployed across the globe, on submarines, deep in underground silos, on strategic bombers.
So a simultaneous detonation means an instantly synchronized global event.
You are looking at a blinding flash worldwide. Major cities, industrial centers, military sites, they just vanish in overlapping fireballs.
Right.
And we use the word fireball casually, but we are really talking about massive spheres of plasma.
They're not actual plasma.
Yeah. These spheres are literally hotter than the core of the sun, and they span kilometers in diameter.
Just pause on that for a second. Hotter than the sun, down here on Earth.
It's hard to wrap your head around. And surrounding those plasma spheres, you have crushing blast waves expanding outward at supersonic speeds. They just flatten infrastructure, concrete, steel, for tens of kilometers in every direction.
But let's bring this back to our remote survivor.
Okay.
The person we are focused on is hiding out in a cabin in the deep wilderness, hundreds of miles from any major city or military base. The blast wave itself might dissipate before it even reaches them. So, what is their very first indication that the world just ended?
The silence. It would be the immediate cessation of all modern technology, because high-altitude nuclear detonations trigger an electromagnetic pulse, or EMP.
Wait, I need to understand the mechanics here. How does a physical explosion cause a global power outage?
Right. So when a nuclear weapon detonates in the upper atmosphere, or even in space, it releases this really intense burst of gamma rays.
Okay.
These gamma rays hurtle down and smash into the molecules in the Earth's upper atmosphere. This collision literally strips electrons away from the air molecule.
So it's charging the atmosphere.
Basically, yeah. Those freed high-energy electrons are then captured and accelerated by the Earth's magnetic field. This rapid movement generates a massive continent-spanning surge of electromagnetic energy that just gets driven down to the surface at the speed of light.
Wow. So for our remote survival group, this isn't just about dodging the physical explosions. It's a forced reset. It's like a universal breaker switch gets flipped globally and the handle snaps off. No phones, no vehicles, no grid.
Exactly. That surge of energy overloads and fries unshielded electronics. It burns out the microchips in your car, knocks out communication satellites, and it physically melts the massive transformers that run the power grid.
So our survivor might see this strange, terrifying flash illuminate the horizon, but their immediate physical reality is that the radio is dead.
Completely dead.
The modern truck sitting in the driveway won't start. You can't just Google, like, what was that flash? Your entire technological connection to humanity is severed in a microsecond. Survival immediately means absolute self-reliance without any modern tech.
And that absolute isolation is just the first hour. Billions would perish almost immediately from the direct blasts, the thermal radiation, and the instantaneous collapse of infrastructure.
Right.
But for the remote survivor who actually makes it through day one, the real existential threat is quietly unfolding right above their heads.
Because our survivors sitting in the dark, maybe congratulating themselves on making it through the EMP, completely unaware that the immense heat from those distant blasts is doing something catastrophic to the atmosphere. We really need to talk about the fires.
The thermal pulses, yeah. The intense heat from thousands of simultaneous detonations would ignite what are known as firestorms.
And these aren't just normal wildfires.
Not at all. These are not standard forest fires. We are talking about conflagrations that consume entire ruined cities, dense forests, massive industrial fuel depots, all across entire continents.
I've seen footage of regular wildfires creating their own wind, which is terrifying enough. I can't imagine what a continent-scale fire does.
The heat generated by these overlapping urban and wildland fires is so intense that it creates its own extreme weather systems, specifically pyrocumulonimbus clouds.
Fire clouds.
Exactly. You get fire tornadoes and hurricane-force winds actively sucking oxygen into the center of the blaze to feed it.
It's basically a massive self-sustaining furnace.
And the byproduct of that furnace is the critical issue here. All of that burning material, the plastics, the concrete, asphalt, the biomass, it injects immense amounts of soot into the atmosphere. The estimates point to upwards of 100 million tons of black carbon being blasted directly upward.
Okay, I need to push back on that for a second.
Sure.
Because 100 million tons sounds like a huge number, but the Earth's atmosphere is massive. How does that relatively small amount of soot on a planetary scale manage to plunge us into a global ice age? Because that feels incredibly counterintuitive.
How does fire cause ice?
Exactly. Fire produces heat. How does a burning planet freeze?
What's fascinating here is the specific physical mechanism of black carbon in the upper atmosphere. You have to picture exactly where that soot is going. It's not just lingering in the lower atmosphere where our normal weather happens.
Right.
The incredible thermal updraft from the firestorms pushes that black carbon all the way up into the stratosphere.
Way above the weather.
Precisely. Way above the rain clouds. Because it's in the stratosphere, there is no rain to wash it out. It just stays up there. And then it spreads across the globe via high-altitude winds, forming this massive, opaque blanket.
So it's just stuck there.
Yeah. And here's why black carbon is so devastating. Unlike white, fluffy water vapor clouds that reflect some sunlight but let a lot of warmth through, black carbon particles are incredibly efficient at absorbing solar radiation.
Oh, I see. It acts like a planetary shield.
Exactly. The soot absorbs the sun's heat high up in the stratosphere, meaning that solar energy never actually reaches the surface of the Earth. The surface is completely robbed of its primary heat source.
Wow. So it's not just a gloomy, overcast day. It's a literal global eclipse that doesn't end.
For years. And without that solar energy reaching the surface, global temperatures plummet dramatically. The climate models show a severe, artificially induced ice age setting in very quickly.
Just brutal cold.
We are looking at years of perpetual darkness and extreme, sustained cold.
Here's where it gets really interesting for our remote survival group. When most people think about a survival gear checklist, they think about, a heavy jacket, a thermal sleeping bag, a good axe.
Right, standard camping stuff.
Yeah. But surviving nuclear winter means enduring extreme, unnatural cold continuously. And you can't just walk outside, chop some wood, and sit around a campfire to stay warm.
Because of what is falling out of that black sky.
Exactly, the radioactive fallout. Because those detonations would irradiate millions of tons of dust and debris, right? Sucking it up into the mushroom clouds and then dropping it back down across vast regions of the planet.
Yeah, fallout is insidious.
I think people assume you could just wash fallout off or boil your water like you would if you were worried about a parasite in a river. But radiation doesn't work like that, does it?
Not at all. Boiling water kills biological threats like bacteria or viruses, but radioactive fallout consists of physical, microscopic particulate matter.
Like heavy metals.
Exactly. Heavy metals and isotopes like strontium-90 and cesium-137. Boiling radioactive water just evaporates the pure water and leaves you with a much more concentrated sludge of radioactive isotopes.
Oh, man. So if you drink that, you're drinking heavy metals that mimic calcium, and your body just absorbs them straight into your bones.
Yeah, it incorporates them into your skeleton, and it binds to the soil the exact same way. It poisons the groundwater and the food chain at a molecular level for generations.
So our survivor is fundamentally trapped. They're freezing, they're in the dark, and the very ground outside their door is covered in an invisible, lethal poison.
Which leads right into their next hurdle, sustenance.
It's like trying to survive inside a sealed greenhouse, where someone has painted the glass black and poisoned the soil. You can't farm because it's too dark and too cold. There's a massive drop in precipitation, so you're dealing with global drought.
It's just compounding disasters.
But hold on. If the sky is totally blacked out by soot, why do the models also warn about severe UV radiation? If the sun is blocked, wouldn't we be protected from UV rays?
That is a great question. It comes down to what happens when the soot blanket eventually begins to thin or shift, creating gaps.
Oh, I see.
The chemical reactions caused by the initial fireballs absolutely decimate the ozone layer.
Wait, how does a fireball on the ground destroy the ozone layer way up in the atmosphere?
Well, when those plasma fireballs heat the air to solar temperatures, they forge massive quantities of nitrogen oxides. These gases get carried up into the stratosphere right along with the soot.
Okay, so the soot and the gases go up together.
Yeah. And up there, nitrogen oxides act as a catalyst. They basically eat the ozone layer like Pac-Man, stripping away the Earth's natural protection against ultraviolet light.
So if a gap in the black carbon clouds finally opens up after like a year of darkness, you don't get a nice warming sunbeam.
No, you get a concentrated spike of UV radiation, one that is intense enough to actively cause severe burns and further damage any terrestrial ecosystems that actually manage to survive the cold.
It is just relentless. You can't farm. If the sun comes out, the UV rays actively burn you. And the ground and water are laced with invisible poison. You are basically trapped on a hostile alien planet, except it's Earth.
This is exactly why the secondary phase of this scenario is far deadlier than the explosions themselves. Billions more would die, not from the blast, but from unprecedented global famine, disease, and exposure.
Let's talk about that famine, because the data outlines a complete collapse of growing seasons.
Utter collapse. The models project that corn yields alone could fall anywhere from 7% to over 80%, depending on the volume of soot injected into the atmosphere.
I really want to translate that percentage into a visceral reality for you listening. An 80% drop in global corn yields isn't just a bad harvest where corn on the cob gets expensive at the grocery store.
No, corn is foundational.
Right. Corn is the caloric foundation of humanity. It feeds our livestock. It's in almost every processed food on the shelves. An 80% drop means the global meat and dairy industry disappears practically overnight. It means grocery store shelves are permanently empty.
It is the absolute mathematical collapse of the agricultural system. For anyone imagining what it takes to survive this, we have to make it explicitly clear traditional survivalist skills are totally useless here.
Because there's nothing to survive on.
Exactly. Foraging, hunting, living off the land, these are off the table.
Right, because you can't hunt if the deer population has already died of starvation or radiation poisoning. You can't forage for berries in toxic frozen soil.
The environment outside your shelter is actively hostile to biology.
Which really forces us to redefine what survival even means in this scenario. We all have this romanticized idea of heading to the mountains and living off the land if society collapses. But the land is dead, the water is poisoned, the sky is black.
Now, the projections indicate the planet wouldn't be completely sterilized. Life, on a microscopic and deep ocean level, is incredibly resilient.
Sure, tardigrades and deep-sea vents.
Exactly. But human civilization as a structured entity would effectively end.
So what does this all mean for our remote survivor? We set out on a mission to understand what it takes for a small group to actually make it through this. The consensus points out that a few pockets of humanity might endure in remote areas, provided they have stored food and basic shelter.
And those two phrases, stored food and basic shelter, are carrying a monumental amount of weight here. They are the absolute minimum requirements, but the definition of basic has entirely changed.
Let's break down that ultimate survival checklist based on everything we've just uncovered.
Let's do it.
First, you need extreme geographic isolation, mostly to avoid the initial blast waves, the worst of the firestorms, and the densest fallout zones.
Which is largely down to luck.
Mostly, yeah.
Yeah.
Second, you need an absolute 100% reliance on already stockpiled food. Because as we established, growing and foraging are dead. You are not planting a victory garden. You are eating out of cans and Mylar bags for years.
And third, that shelter needs to be incredibly robust. A wooden cabin won't cut it. It has to withstand ice age temperatures, filter out radioactive dust, and remain structurally sound for over a decade.
10 years.
A decade or longer, yeah.
Just sit with that reality for a second. 10 years of freezing in the dark, eating canned beans, hoping your Geiger counter doesn't tick too fast if you need to step outside to clear a vent. And on top of the environmental threats, there's the human element. The extreme scarcity of unpoisoned resources means conflict among survivors would be rampant and vicious.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, survival in this context isn't an adventure. It's a grim, decade-long endurance test locked inside a bunker. It is about outlasting a hostile atmosphere while avoiding detection by other desperate people who didn't prepare.
It's basically becoming a deep-sea creature, living under immense pressure in near-total darkness, surviving on whatever meager scraps you already have hoarded.
When we look at this entire sequence of events from the EMP to the firestorms, the nuclear winter, the collapse of the biosphere, it really forces a broader perspective on our present reality. The Earth itself would survive this extreme hypothetical. The rock would still be orbiting the sun.
But it would be a swift, self-inflicted erasure of modern society. It would test whether our species could claw back from the brink in a completely unrecognizable, hostile world.
Which underscores exactly why the interconnected systems we rely on every day are so incredibly fragile.
Yeah.
100 million tons of soot seems like an abstract metric. But as we've explored, the cascading effects of that single variable destroy the very atmospheric foundation that allows human life to exist on the surface.
And for you listening, while this is admittedly a really dark, intense topic, there is a profound value in understanding the mechanisms behind it. Realizing the immense fragility of our interconnected systems makes us better informed citizens today.
It gives you a new appreciation for the mundane.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It makes you realize that the global food chain you rely on, the predictable climate outside your window, the hum of electricity powering the device you're listening to right now, these aren't permanent guarantees.
No, they're not.
They are a delicate, highly calibrated balance. Understanding how quickly and easily they could be disrupted makes us much more capable of appreciating the balance we currently enjoy.
It strips away the illusion of invulnerability. We are deeply biologically tethered to our environment. This scenario highlights just how rapidly that environment can be mutated into something unsurvivable.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over on your own. We spent a lot of time talking about the physical logistics of survival, the radiation, the freezing temperatures, the exact percentage drop in corn yields, the Mylar bags of food.
The biological mechanics of staying alive, basically.
Right. But think about the psychological reality.
Yeah.
If a small group of humans is forced to live in a dark, freezing, toxic bunker for 10 years, with absolutely no new information coming in, no sunlight, no connection to the outside world, just that ultimate deafening silence we talked about at the very beginning.
Total sensory and social deprivation on a species-wide level.
How fundamentally would human psychology and our very definition of what it means to be human have to mutate just to survive the dark? The blast might wipe out our technology, but that 10-year-long night might wipe out who we fundamentally are. Something to think about the next time you flip a light switch.